Divorced mom faced her abusive ex. What the German Shepherd did stunned the court. In a crowded courtroom, a terrified mother fought to protect her little girl. Across from her sat the man who had once destroyed their lives, smiling, confident, certain he would win. But no one expected the loyal German Shepherd at her side to suddenly leap to his feet and expose a hidden secret that would shake the entire courtroom. What was inside that briefcase? Why did the dog know before anyone else? And how could one shocking moment change the fate of a family forever? When justice comes on four legs, can the truth finally set them free, or will the past tighten its grip? Let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. If you like stories that connect us, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. The family court of District 9 hummed with a tense energy that made the air feel thick and heavy. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. At the plaintiff's table, Lila's fingers intertwined with her 9-year-old daughter Emily's smaller ones, drawing comfort from each other's touch. Justice, their German Shepherd, lay quietly at their feet, his warm presence a steady anchor in the storm of emotions. Across the aisle, Mark sat with perfect posture in his expensive suit, every inch the successful businessman he portrayed to the world. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Lila with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When the bailiff wasn't looking, he leaned slightly toward their table. "You're going to regret this," he whispered, his voice carrying just far enough for Lila to hear. "Nobody believes you anyway." Lila's hand tightened around Emily's, and she felt justice shift slightly against her leg. The dog's ears perked forward, alert to the undercurrent of threat in Mark's voice. Judge Ramirez entered the courtroom, her black robes sweeping behind her as she took her place at the bench. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and the shuffling of feet filled the room. "Be seated," Judge Ramirez said, her stern gaze sweeping the courtroom. "We're here today to determine custody arrangements for Emily Matthews. Let's begin with opening statements." Rachel, Lila's lawyer, stood with quiet confidence. Her navy suit was crisp, her manner professional but warm. "Your Honor, we're here today because Lila Matthews is seeking full custody of her daughter Emily, with supervised visitation for the father, Mark Matthews. We will present evidence of Mr. Matthews' history of domestic violence, financial manipulation, and behavior that puts both mother and child at risk." Mark's lawyer, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, rose next. "Your Honor, my client has undergone extensive anger management therapy and has maintained a stable, successful career. He's a changed man who deeply loves his daughter and deserves equal custody rights." As testimony began, Lila felt her stomach twist into knots. Rachel presented documentation of hospital visits, police reports, and Emily's therapy records. The judge's expression remained neutral, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she reviewed the evidence. When Mark took the stand, he was the picture of remorse. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice thick with carefully crafted emotion. "I've worked hard to become a better man, a better father. I just want to be part of my daughter's life." Emily pressed closer to Lila's side, and Justice lifted his head, dark eyes fixed on Mark. The dog's muscles tensed beneath his fur. "I've completed every program the court required," Mark continued, pulling documents from his briefcase. "I've maintained steady employment, bought a new home in a good school district. I can provide Emily with everything she needs." That's when it happened. Justice's low growl rolled through the courtroom like distant thunder. Every head turned toward the sound. The dog's attention was laser-focused on Mark, particularly on the briefcase at his feet. "Order," Judge Ramirez called out, frowning at the disruption. "Mrs. Matthews, please control your dog." Lila's heart raced as she placed a gentle hand on Justice's back. "Your Honor, I apologize. Justice is Emily's certified therapy dog. He's been crucial in helping her cope with trauma from witnessing domestic violence. He's normally very calm in public settings." The judge's expression softened slightly as she looked at Emily, who had shrunk further into her mother's side. "I understand the dog's therapeutic purpose, but we cannot have disruptions in this courtroom." But Justice wasn't settling. Instead, he rose to his feet, the leash pulling taut as he continued to growl, his attention unwavering from Mark's briefcase. The hair along his back stood up, and his stance shifted from alert to aggressive. Mark's face, for just a moment, lost its practiced calm. A flicker of something, fear, anger, crossed his features before he could hide it. "Your Honor," Rachel said, standing quickly, given Justice's training and background in detection work, perhaps. Judge Ramirez held up her hand, her gaze moving between the agitated dog and Mark's increasingly uncomfortable expression. The atmosphere in the courtroom had become electric with tension. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," she announced, bringing down her gavel with a sharp crack. When we return, I expect all parties to have regained their composure, human and canine alike. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as people began to rise. Justice maintained his rigid stance, his growl never ceasing as Mark hurriedly gathered his briefcase, clutching it close to his chest as he moved toward the door. The dog's behavior had shattered the carefully constructed image Mark had been presenting, and everyone in the courtroom could feel it. Emily wrapped her arms around Justice's neck, burying her face in his fur. "Good boy," she whispered, so quietly that only Lila could hear. "Good boy." The 15-minute recess stretched into 30 minutes as court officers surrounded Mark's briefcase. Justice remained focused, his nails clicking against the floor as he scratched at the leather exterior, whining with increasing urgency. "Your Honor," Rachel said, standing tall beside Lila's table. Given Justice's background in detection work with the K-9 unit and his current role as a therapy dog, I move that we examine the contents of Mr. Matthews' briefcase. Mark's attorney jumped to his feet. "This is absurd. We can't allow a dog to dictate court proceedings." Judge Ramirez studied the scene before her, dark eyes moving from Justice's determined behavior to Mark's increasingly pale complexion. "Mr. Matthews, would you object to having your briefcase examined?" Mark's fingers tightened around the handle. "This is private property, Your Honor. There are confidential business documents inside, which should have been submitted during discovery," Rachel pointed out. "If there are relevant documents being withheld, there's nothing relevant," Mark snapped, his carefully constructed calm cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Judge Ramirez's expression hardened. "Mr. Matthews, hand the briefcase to the bailiff." The courtroom fell silent as Mark reluctantly surrendered his briefcase. The bailiff placed it on a table at the front of the courtroom, and 2 court officers began a systematic examination of its contents. Emily pressed against Lila's side, her small hand squeezing her mother's fingers. Justice finally sat, though his eyes never left the briefcase. "Your Honor," one of the officers called out, "you need to see this." The judge descended from her bench, approaching the table where documents were being carefully laid out. Her eyebrows rose as she examined paper after paper. "These appear to be banking statements," she announced, "from accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland." She held up several photographs, and these, a collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The photos showed Mark with another family, a woman and 2 young children. They were dated within the past year. That's not what it looks like," Mark stammered, rising from his chair. His face had turned from pale to red. "Those are business associates." "Business associates," Judge Ramirez repeated flatly, holding up another document. "Would these business associates be related to the offshore accounts holding several $1 million, money that wasn't declared in your financial disclosures to this court?" Lila felt her hands trembling. All those years of Mark claiming he couldn't afford proper child support, of him fighting her requests for Emily's therapy payments, while he had millions hidden away. And another family? Her stomach churned. "Mom?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "Is Dad going to be in trouble?" Before Lila could answer, Mark's voice boomed across the courtroom. "This is a setup. That dog, he's been trained to target me. This whole thing is a conspiracy. Mr. Matthews." Judge Ramirez's voice cut through his protests like a steel blade. "Control yourself or I will have you removed." She turned to the court officers. "I want these documents cataloged and secured immediately. We'll need forensic accounting to examine these accounts." Mark's lawyer was frantically whispering to him, but Mark shrugged him off. "Your Honor, I can explain everything. The accounts, they're perfectly legitimate business holdings. And those photos, they're being taken completely out of context." "Save your explanations," Judge Ramirez said, returning to her bench. "These documents require proper examination." She picked up her gavel. "This hearing is postponed until we can fully investigate the evidence that has come to light. Mr. Matthews, you are not to leave the state. Your passport will be surrendered to the court immediately." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that made him. Emily jump. "Court is adjourned until further notice." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as people began to rise. Mark stood frozen, his facade completely shattered, as court officers approached him to escort him to process the surrender of his passport. Rachel turned to Lila and Emily, her expression both triumphant and concerned. "Let's get you 2 out of here," she said softly. "We can talk about next steps tomorrow." Lila nodded, still processing the shocking revelations. She helped Emily to her feet, keeping her daughter close as Justice fell into step beside them. The German shepherd walked with his head high, his duty fulfilled. As they reached the courthouse steps, Emily stopped and wrapped her arms around Justice's neck. "You're the bravest dog ever," she whispered into his fur. Justice responded by gently licking her cheek, causing the first small smile Lila had seen on her daughter's face all day. Lila's hands were still shaking as she held Emily close, but there was strength in her voice when she spoke. "Let's go home, sweetheart." Justice padded alongside them, alert and protective, as they made their way to the parking lot, leaving behind a courtroom full of secrets finally exposed to the light of day. The microwave hummed softly in their small apartment kitchen as Lila reheated leftover spaghetti for dinner. Emily sat quietly at their worn wooden table, pushing a meatball around her plate with her fork. Justice lay underneath, his chin resting on his paws, but his eyes remained alert, watching over his family. The events from the courtroom still hung heavy in the air. Street lights filtered through their second-floor window, casting long shadows across their modest dining space. The tick-tock of the wall clock seemed unusually loud in the silence. "Mom?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why does Justice always know?" Lila's hand froze midway to her mouth, the fork trembling slightly. She set it down, memories washing over her like a tide. She couldn't hold back. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "He always knows when something bad is going to happen. Like today with the briefcase. How does he know?" Justice's ears perked up at the mention of his name, and he shifted closer to Emily's chair. Lila took a deep breath, her mind traveling back to that rainy night 8 months ago, the night that changed everything. "Do you remember the night we left?" Lila asked softly. Emily nodded, her small hand automatically reaching down to stroke Justice's fur. "The Thunder Night." "Yes, the Thunder Night." Lila's voice grew distant as the memories flooded back. It had been pouring rain, the kind that drummed against windows and drowned out all other sounds. Mark had been drinking again, his mood darker than the storm clouds outside. Lila had been preparing dinner, trying to keep her hands from shaking as she heard his heavy footsteps approaching the kitchen. Justice, who had only been with them for 2 weeks, a therapy dog recommended by Emily's counselor, had been lying in the corner of the kitchen. But as Mark entered, the German Shepherd's demeanor changed instantly. He rose to his feet, his posture alert but calm. "What's this garbage?" Mark had slurred, gesturing at the pot of soup on the stove. "You know I hate soup. It's Emily's favorite." Lila had replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "She's had a cold, and I thought." The pot crashed to the floor as Mark swept it off the stove. "You don't think?" he roared. "That's your problem. You never think." Justice moved forward, positioning himself between Mark and Lila, his warning growl low but clear. "And this mutt," Mark had snarled, "we're getting rid of it tomorrow." That's when Emily had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "No, Daddy. Please don't take Justice away." Mark had turned toward Emily, his face contorted with rage. "Go to your room." But as he took a step toward Emily, Justice moved with incredible speed, placing himself in front of the little girl. His growl had become more pronounced, teeth showing. "Get out of my way, you stupid dog." Mark had advanced, but Justice stood his ground. Lila had seen something snap in Mark's eyes, then, that dangerous glint that always preceded his worst moments. But before he could reach Emily, Justice had barked sharply, forcing Mark to step back. In that moment, Lila had found her courage. She grabbed Emily's hand and run for the door, Justice covering their retreat. They'd fled into the rainy night with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and Emily's stuffed rabbit clutched in her trembling hands. Back in their present-day apartment, Lila wiped a tear from her cheek. Justice knew that night, just like he's always known, because he can sense when people aren't being honest or when they might hurt us. It's what he was trained for, but it's more than that. He loves us, and he protects what he loves. Emily slid from her chair and knelt beside Justice, wrapping her arms around his neck. "He's our guardian angel," she said with complete conviction. Justice's tail thumped against the floor as he nuzzled Emily's cheek, drawing a giggle from her, a sound that had become increasingly rare before Justice came into their lives. Later that night, as Lila tucked Emily into bed, she watched her daughter perform what had become their nightly ritual. Emily leaned over the side of her bed, reaching out to Justice, who stood faithfully beside her. "Promise you'll keep us safe forever," Emily whispered to him, her small hand extended. Justice stepped forward, gently licking her palm before settling down outside her bedroom door, his body positioned so he could see both the room's entrance and Emily's bed. His eyes remained alert, even as his posture relaxed. Lila switched off the light, leaving the door cracked open just enough for the hallway light to cast a reassuring glow into the room. As she headed to her own bedroom, she paused to look back at Justice, their protector, their truth finder, their family. The German Shepherd's eyes met hers in the dim light, conveying a silent promise that needed no words. He would always be there, standing guard between them and whatever dangers the world might bring. In that moment, despite the day's turmoil, Lila felt truly safe for the first time since leaving the courthouse. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk cafe. As Lila stirred her untouched coffee, Justice lay at her feet, his chin resting on his paws but his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The events from yesterday's courtroom still played through her mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. Rachel, her lawyer, spread several documents across the small table, careful to weigh them down against the light breeze. The discovery of those documents in Mark's briefcase gives us leverage, she said, her voice steady and reassuring. But we need to strengthen our position. We need to explain Justice's behavior in a way the court will understand. Lila nodded, finally taking a sip of her now lukewarm coffee. He's never wrong about these things. But how do we prove that to a judge? That's why I asked someone to join us. Rachel checked her watch. He should be here any minute. As if on cue, Justice's ears perked up, and his tail began to wag. A tall man with salt and pepper hair approached their table, walking with the measured stride of someone who had spent years in uniform. Justice immediately sat up, his posture alert but welcoming. "Well, look who we have here," the man said, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. He knelt down, and Justice pressed his nose into the man's extended hand. "You remember me, don't you, boy?" "Lila, this is Tom Peterson," Rachel introduced. "He's a retired canine officer who worked with Justice during his initial training." Tom pulled up a chair, his movements careful and deliberate. "Justice was one of the best dogs I ever trained," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. Watching him work was like watching an artist paint, pure instinct, combined with perfect training. The waiter brought Tom a coffee, and he wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "I heard about what happened in court yesterday. Not surprised one bit. Justice always had a nose for deception. Can you help us?" Lila leaned forward, hope creeping into her voice. "Can you explain to the court why Justice's reaction matters?" Tom took a thoughtful sip of his coffee. Justice was trained not just for therapy work, but also in detection. He can identify specific scents, drugs, explosives, and even the chemical markers of stress and aggression. When he reacted to that briefcase, he wasn't just being protective. He was signaling that he'd found something significant. Rachel pulled out a legal pad, her pen moving quickly across the paper. "Would you be willing to testify about this? About Justice's training and capabilities?" "Of course." Tom nodded firmly. "But you need to understand something." His expression grew serious as he looked directly at Lila. "Men like Mark, they don't just give up when they're caught. Sometimes, being exposed makes them more dangerous." Lila felt a chill despite the warm morning Sunday. Justice sensed her unease and pressed closer to her leg. "I've seen it countless times during my years on the force," Tom continued. "These types, they care more about control than consequences. The evidence in that briefcase, whatever it reveals, it's just going to make him more determined." Rachel reached across the table and squeezed Lila's hand. "That's why we need to be thorough. With Tom's testimony about Justice's training and capabilities, we can establish that the dog's reaction wasn't random. It adds credibility to everything we found." They spent the next hour discussing strategy, Tom sharing stories about Justice's training days that could help their case. The German Shepherd remained alert throughout the conversation, occasionally glancing up at Tom with clear recognition and respect. As the meeting wound down, Rachel gathered her papers. "I'll draft the motion to include Tom's expert testimony. We're going to show the judge that Justice's behavior was based on solid training and genuine detection skills." They said their goodbyes, with Tom giving Justice one final pat. "Keep watching over them, boy," he murmured. "You know what to do." Lila and Justice started their walk home, the morning crowd thinning as they moved away from the cafe district. The conversation with Tom had left her feeling both more confident and more wary. Justice walked beside her, his stride matching hers perfectly. 3 blocks from home, Justice's ears suddenly flattened against his head. His pace slowed, and a low rumble formed in his chest. Lila's heart skipped a beat as she noticed a dark sedan cruising slowly behind them. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see the driver, but she didn't need to see to know. Her fingers tightened on Justice's leash as she forced herself to keep walking at a steady pace. The car maintained its distance, neither falling back nor getting closer. Justice positioned himself between Lila and the street, his body tense and ready. Another block passed, and still the car followed. Lila's palm grew sweaty around the leash, but she remembered Tom's words about staying calm under pressure. Justice would pick up on her fear, and she needed him focused. When they reached the corner, the car finally accelerated, passing them slowly. Lila caught a glimpse of the driver through the front windshield, just enough to confirm her worst fears. Mark's face was expressionless as he drove past, but his message was clear. He was watching, waiting, planning his next move. Justice maintained his protective stance until the car disappeared around the corner. Only then did he relax slightly, though his eyes remained fixed on the direction the car had gone. Lila's stomach churned with anxiety, but she forced herself to take deep breaths. They had allies now: Rachel, Tom, and most importantly, Justice. Whatever Mark was planning, they wouldn't face it alone. The evening shadows stretched across Lila's small apartment as she helped Emily get ready for bed. The little girl's eyes were heavy with sleep as she brushed her teeth, her movements slow and dreamy. Justice paced the hallway outside the bathroom, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood floors. His ears twitched at every small sound from outside, his body tense and alert. "Time for pajamas, sweetheart," Lila said, guiding Emily to her bedroom. The girl climbed into her favorite pink and purple nightgown, the soft fabric swimming around her small frame. "Mom, why is Justice so jumpy tonight?" Emily asked, watching the German Shepherd make another pass by her doorway. Lila tucked the covers around Emily's shoulders, trying to keep her voice light. "He's just doing his job, honey. Making sure we're safe and sound." Emily reached out to pat Justice as he paused in his rounds. "Good boy," she murmured sleepily. "You're the best guard dog ever." Lila sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers through Emily's hair. "Would you like me to read you a story?" Emily nodded, already half asleep. "The one about the brave princess, please." As Lila read, Justice continued his vigilant patrol. Every few minutes, he would stop at the apartment's front door, sniffing along the bottom edge before resuming his rounds. His behavior made Lila nervous, but she kept reading, determined not to let Emily pick up on her anxiety. "And the princess lived happily ever after." Lila finished softly, looking down to find Emily fast asleep. She leaned down to kiss her daughter's forehead, then quietly stood up. Just as she was turning off Emily's bedside lamp, a soft scraping sound came from the front door. Justice's head snapped toward the noise, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Lila's heart jumped into her throat as she quickly pulled Emily's door nearly closed, leaving just a crack. Justice stood rigid by the front door, his hackles raised. Lila approached cautiously, her bare feet silent on the floor. There, partially visible under the door, was a white envelope being pushed through the gap. Before she could react, it disappeared inside completely, followed by the sound of hurrying footsteps in the hallway. Justice lunged forward, barking once before Lila could grab his collar. "Shh," she whispered urgently, not wanting to wake Emily. The dog quieted but remained tense, his eyes fixed on the envelope lying innocently on the floor. With trembling fingers, Lila picked up the envelope. It was plain white, with no writing on the outside. Justice pressed against her legs, still growling softly as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words typed in bold letters: "You will regret this." The room seemed to spin as Lila stared at the threat. Justice whined softly, nudging her hand with his nose. His reaction to the letter was visceral. He clearly recognized something about it, perhaps a scent that reminded him of Mark. Lila's first instinct was to call the police, but she knew from bitter experience that they couldn't do much about an anonymous note. Instead, she carefully placed the letter and envelope in a plastic bag, remembering Tom's advice about documenting everything. She spent the next hour checking and double-checking all the windows and doors, Justice following close behind. Every shadow seemed menacing, every creak of the building settling made her jump. Finally, satisfied that the apartment was secure, she changed into her nightclothes with shaking hands. Sleep felt impossible, but she knew she needed to try. Tomorrow, she would show the letter to Tom, get his advice on next steps. For now, she had to stay strong for Emily. Lila crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Justice took up his usual position against the bedroom door, his body blocking the entrance. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, she could see his ears constantly moving, tracking every sound from outside. The digital clock on her nightstand showed 11:45, then 12:15, then 1:30. Lila lay awake, her mind racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. What else would Mark do? How far would he go to punish her for exposing his secrets? The evidence in the briefcase must have been damaging for him to escalate so quickly. Justice's steady breathing provided some comfort, but fear kept sleep at bay. She watched the shadows move across her ceiling, remembering other nights of lying awake, listening for Mark's footsteps, wondering if tonight would be the night he lost control completely. At least now she wasn't alone. She had Rachel's legal expertise, Tom's experience, and most importantly, Justice's unwavering protection. The German Shepherd hadn't left his post by the door, his body a physical barrier between their family and whatever threats waited outside. Still, as the night crept forward and sleep remained elusive, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Mark's threatening letter was a warning shot, a promise of worse things to come. She pulled the blankets tighter around herself, grateful that at least Emily was sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware of the darkness gathering around them. Tomorrow, she would have to be strong again. Tomorrow, she would show Tom the letter and plan their next moves. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of her bedroom, Lila allowed herself to feel the full weight of her fear, with only Justice's vigilant presence keeping her from completely breaking down. The clock ticked past 2 o'clock, then 3. Justice remained alert, his ears swiveling at every sound from the street below. Lila stared into the darkness, wondering how many more nights like this lay ahead, how much more danger they would have to face before they could truly feel safe. The morning sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds of Arthur Morton's cramped office. The local historian's workspace was a maze of filing cabinets and towering stacks of papers, with barely enough room for Lila, Rachel, and Justice to squeeze inside. The German Shepherd stayed close to Lila's side, his nose twitching at the musty smell of old documents. "These records go back 20 years, Arthur explained, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he pulled out another drawer. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency through the files. "If your ex-husband has been operating businesses in this county, we'll find them here." Rachel nodded, her professional demeanor steady as always. "We're particularly interested in any property acquisitions or business registrations between 2010 and 2015. That's when Mark's unexplained income started showing up. Lila watched as Arthur began spreading documents across his desk. Justice paced restlessly behind them, his nails clicking against the linoleum floor. The sound echoed in the quiet room, mixing with the whir of an ancient desk fan. "Here's something interesting," Arthur muttered, pulling out a yellowed sheet. A series of property purchases under different company names, but the paperwork was filed by the same notary. He laid out more documents, creating a pattern that made Lila's stomach clench. "Look at these addresses." Rachel leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "They're all within blocks of each other. Empty lots, or condemned buildings, bought for practically nothing." She turned to Lila. "Did Mark ever mention real estate investments to you?" Lila shook her head, her throat tight. "He always said his money came from his consulting work. But the numbers never made sense." Justice suddenly perked up, his ears forward. He moved purposefully toward a filing cabinet. In the corner, sniffing intently around its base. The cabinet looked older than the others, its metal surface dulled with age. "That's odd," Arthur said, watching the dog. "That cabinet hasn't been used in years. It's from before we digitized most of our records." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Justice doesn't react like this without reason. Could we take a look inside?" Arthur shuffled over, keyring jingling. "It might be stuck. Nobody's opened this in ages." The lock resisted at first, then gave way with a rusty screech. As Arthur pulled the drawer open, Justice's tail began wagging rapidly. His behavior reminded Lila of their courtroom revelation, sending a shiver down her spine. Inside, buried beneath dusty folders, they found a thick manila envelope. Arthur's eyes widened as he examined its contents. "These are complaints filed against various businesses. Multiple allegations of fraud, but they were all dismissed or settled quietly." Rachel spread the documents across a clear space on the floor. Justice sat alertly beside them, his eyes fixed on the papers. "These companies, they match the property purchases. But look at the victims: retired couples, widows, small business owners. They all invested significant amounts." Lila's hands shook as she read through the complaints. The pattern was clear: vulnerable people convinced to invest in renovation projects that never materialized. The money disappeared through a maze of shell companies, leaving the victims with nothing but worthless papers. "This is how he did it," Rachel said quietly. "He'd buy worthless properties through different companies, inflate their value through fake assessments, then use them as collateral for investments. When the money came in, it would be laundered through renovation costs that never actually happened." Arthur pulled out more files, his face grim. "There are dozens of victims here. Some lost their life savings." He looked at Lila with newfound understanding. "Your ex-husband, he's not just a businessman, he's a professional con man." Justice pressed against Lila's leg, offering silent support as she struggled to process the revelation. All those years, while she'd worried about making ends meet, Mark had been systematically destroying people's lives. The expensive gifts, the luxury vacations, it was all built on stolen dreams. Rachel carefully gathered the documents, placing them in her briefcase. This changes everything. It's not just about custody anymore. These records show a pattern of criminal behavior that spans years. Lila clutched the edge of the desk, steadying herself. All those times he told me I was bad with money, that I couldn't understand business. He was gaslighting me, making me doubt myself while he stole from innocent people. Justice whined softly, nudging her hand. His presence grounded her, reminding her that she wasn't alone anymore. The truth was finally coming to light, one document at a time. "We'll need to make copies of everything," Rachel said, her voice firm with purpose. "These records could help not just your case, but all the people he's hurt." Arthur nodded solemnly. "I'll help you document everything. These people deserve justice." He glanced at the German Shepherd with respect. "Your dog, he seems to have a nose for uncovering the truth." Lila knelt beside Justice, wrapping her arms around his thick fur. "He's always known. Somehow, he's always seen through Mark's lies." They spent the next hour carefully copying and cataloging each document. The evidence painted a picture darker than Lila had imagined. Mark wasn't just an abusive husband, he was a predator who had built an empire on deception and broken trust. As they prepared to leave, Lila held the folder of copied documents close to her chest. Each page represented someone whose life Mark had damaged, someone whose trust he had betrayed. The weight of this knowledge was heavy, but it was also empowering. For the first time, she had concrete proof of the monster hiding behind Mark's charming facade. Rachel placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We've got him, Lila. This time, he can't talk his way out of it." Justice led the way out of the office, his head held high as if he knew the significance of their discovery. Lila followed, her steps more certain than when she'd arrived. The truth was finally emerging, and with it, the hope that Mark would face consequences for his actions. The courthouse loomed before Lila, its stone columns casting long shadows in the morning light. Justice walked steadily beside her, his presence giving her strength as they climbed the steps. Emily was safe at school today. This hearing would be too intense for her to witness. Inside the courtroom, the air felt thick with tension. Mark sat at his table, surrounded by expensive suits and polished briefcases. His new legal team exuded confidence, their documents spread out like weapons ready for battle. Judge Ramirez called the session to order, her gavel crack echoing through the hushed room. "We're here to address new evidence and testimony regarding the custody case of Emily Watson." Mark's lead attorney, a sharp-featured man named Davidson, stood up. "Your Honor, we must address the irregular events of our last session." His voice dripped with practiced concern. The disruption caused by Mrs. Watson's dog was clearly orchestrated to prejudice the court. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Lila's heart pounded as she felt all eyes turn toward her and Justice, who sat calmly at her feet. "We have evidence," Davidson continued, "that Mrs. Watson has been training her dog to react negatively to my client. This kind of theatrical manipulation has no place in your courtroom." Rachel stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. These are baseless accusations without any supporting evidence." "The evidence is clear," Davidson shot back. "Mrs. Watson is desperate. She's willing to use any trick, any manipulation to maintain control over her daughter and punish my client." Mark leaned forward, his face a perfect mask of wounded innocence. "I've tried to be reasonable, Your Honor. But Lila," he shook his head sadly, "she's become unstable since our separation. This whole scene with the dog was just another example of her vindictive behavior." Lila felt her chest tighten. She recognized this version of Mark, the concerned, rational man who made her look crazy. It was the same act that had kept her silent for years, made her doubt her own mind. "Mrs. Watson has been coaching this animal," Davidson declared. "It's a transparent attempt to create drama and sway the court's opinion." The judge's stern gaze swept the courtroom. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Watson's counsel, how do you respond?" Rachel stood, her posture straight and confident. "Your Honor, we have an expert witness who can speak to the dog's training and capabilities. I'd like to call Thomas Morgan to the stand." Tom walked forward, his police background evident in his measured steps and steady demeanor. After being sworn in, he sat in the witness box, his eyes meeting Lila's with quiet reassurance. "Mr. Morgan, please state your credentials for the court," Rachel began. "I served 25 years as a canine officer with the police department," Tom replied. "I've trained over 50 police dogs, including Justice, who was one of our most successful service animals before his retirement." "And can you explain Justice's training?" Tom leaned forward slightly. Justice was trained in multiple disciplines: search and rescue, drug detection, and human behavior recognition. These dogs develop an instinctive ability to sense danger and deception. It's not something that can be faked or trained after the fact. Davidson jumped up. Objection. This is speculation. Overruled, Judge Ramirez said firmly. Continue, Mr. Morgan. What we saw in this courtroom wasn't a trick, Tom explained. Justice was responding to something he perceived as a threat. These reactions come from years of professional training and natural instinct. You can't fake that kind of response. The dog would know the difference. Rachel nodded. In your professional opinion, could Justice's behavior have been staged? Absolutely not, Tom said with conviction. These dogs are trained to ignore distractions and commands that conflict with their instincts. If Mrs. Watson had tried to make Justice act aggressively without cause, he would have simply ignored her. The judge studied Tom carefully. And you're certain about this dog's training level? Yes, Your Honor. I personally worked with Justice for 5 years. His record was impeccable. He's saved lives, found missing persons, and identified countless threats. His instincts are extraordinary. Davidson tried again. Your Honor, regardless of the dog's training, this is still highly irregular. What's irregular? Judge Ramirez interrupted. Is the contents we found in your client's briefcase. She turned to Tom. Would you say Justice's reaction that day was consistent with his training? Completely consistent, Tom confirmed. He sensed something wrong and acted to alert us. That's exactly what he was trained to do. The judge considered for a long moment, then nodded. I've heard enough. The case will continue, and I'm taking note of Justice's reactions as part of the established record. Mark's facade cracked slightly, a flash of rage crossing his face before he could hide it. Lila recognized that look. It was the one that usually preceded his worst moments. As they left the courtroom, Lila felt lighter. Tom's testimony had turned the tide, giving weight to what Justice had been trying to tell them all along. But her relief was short-lived. In the hallway, Mark suddenly appeared beside her, his voice low and menacing. You can't win, he whispered, close enough that only she could hear. You're nothing without me, and you know it. Before Lila could react, Justice lunged forward, straining at his leash. The sudden movement made Mark stumble backward, his carefully constructed composure shattering as real fear flashed across his face. He caught himself against the wall, trying to maintain his dignity as several people turned to stare. Justice stood firm between them, his posture protective but controlled. The message was clear: Mark wouldn't be getting any closer to Lila today. Rachel quickly guided Lila toward the exit, Justice maintaining his barrier position until they were safely away from Mark. Tom followed close behind, his presence adding another layer of security to their retreat. As they stepped into the sunlight, Lila took a deep breath. For the first time, she had seen real fear in Mark's eyes. His power over her was breaking, one small victory at a time, and Justice was making sure of it. The evening shadows stretched long across Lila's apartment walls as she helped Emily with her homework. Justice, usually calm at this hour, paced restlessly between the front door and windows, his nails clicking against the hardwood floor. Mom, Justice is acting weird, Emily said, looking up from her math worksheet. Lila watched as Justice scratched at the door again, letting out a sharp bark that echoed through their small apartment. I know, sweetie. He's been like this for an hour now. The German Shepherd's behavior grew more insistent. He paused at the door, scratched frantically, then turned to Lila with intense eyes before repeating the cycle. His barks became more urgent, a deep resonance that meant business. Should we call someone? Emily asked, worry creeping into her voice. Before Lila could answer, her phone buzzed. Tom's name lit up the screen. Lila, is Justice acting up? Tom's voice carried concern. Yes, he won't stop barking and scratching at the door. How did you know? Call it instinct. I'm 10 minutes away. Something's got him worked up, and I've learned to trust his hunches. Mind if I stop by? Relief flooded through Lila. Please do. I've never seen him this agitated. When Tom arrived, Justice's excitement peaked. He circled the retired K-9 officer, whining and tugging at his sleeve. What is it, boy? Tom knelt beside Justice, studying his behavior. He's trying to tell us something. We need to follow him. Follow him? But it's getting dark. Lila hesitated, glancing at Emily. I can call Mrs. Martinez next door, Emily offered. She always says I can come over if there's an emergency. Tom nodded approvingly. Smart thinking. I have a strong feeling this is important. Lila. Justice doesn't act this way without reason. After settling Emily with their neighbor, Lila joined Tom in his truck, Justice sitting alertly in the backseat. As they pulled away from the apartment complex, Justice began whining and pawing at the window. "Left here," Tom said, following Justice's cues. The dog's behavior shifted with each turn, becoming more intense when they were on the right track. 20 minutes later, they found themselves in an industrial area of town, rows of storage units stretching into the darkness. Justice's excitement reached a fever pitch as they approached the safe harbor storage facility. "Wait a minute," Lila said, recognition dawning. "Mark used to have a unit here. He'd never let me near it." Tom pulled out his phone. "That's enough probable cause for me. I'm calling in some favors." Within 30 minutes, 2 police cruisers arrived. Officer Sarah Chen, Tom's former partner, led the group. "Tom filled me in," Chen said, approaching with a flashlight in hand. "We've got a warrant coming through based on the evidence from court and Justice's behavior. These dogs don't lie." Justice led them straight to unit number 312, scratching at the rolling door with determination. The storage facility manager arrived with keys, looking nervous under the police lights. "Stand back," Officer Chen ordered as she lifted the place door. The beam of flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating stacks of boxes and filing cabinets. Justice darted inside, heading straight for a corner cabinet. "He's found something," Tom said, following the dog. Lila's hands trembled as they began examining the contents. Box after box revealed Mark's carefully hidden life, ledgers detailing money movements through offshore accounts, letters threatening various victims of his schemes, and valuable items that had been reported stolen from his previous partners. "Look at these dates," Officer Chen said, flipping through a leather-bound notebook. "He's been doing this for years, long before he met you, Lila." Lila picked up a stack of letters, her stomach churning as she read. "These are from other women. They're all saying the same things I did, that he threatened them, stole from them, manipulated them." "This is a gold mine of evidence," Tom said, carefully photographing each item. "This proves a pattern of behavior that no judge can ignore." Hope swelled in Lila's chest as she watched the officers document everything. Finally, here was proof that she wasn't crazy, that everything she'd feared about Mark was true. Justice sat proudly beside her, accepting gentle pats from the officers who kept praising his discovery. In the harsh glare of police flashlights, Lila could see years of Mark's carefully constructed lies crumbling. They worked methodically for hours, cataloging every item. Each piece told part of a larger story, one of systematic abuse, fraud, and manipulation that spanned more than a decade. "We'll need to process all of this," Officer Chen explained as they finished, "but this is exactly what we needed to build a solid case." The night had grown late when Lila's phone rang. Her heart sank as she saw Rachel's number. "Lila." Her lawyer's voice was tense. "Mark just filed for emergency custody of Emily. He's claiming you're unstable and using justice to manipulate the court. The hearing is set for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The hope that had been building all evening wavered. Lila leaned against Tom's truck, her legs suddenly weak. "He knows," she whispered. "Somehow, he knows we found this place. He's trying to take Emily before we can use any of it." "We'll be ready for him," Rachel assured her. "Get home and get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." As they drove back to her apartment, Justice rested his head on Lila's shoulder from the back seat, offering silent comfort. The weight of what they'd discovered, and the threat of tomorrow's hearing, pressed heavy on her heart. One step forward, and Mark immediately forced her 2 steps back. The game of cat and mouse was far from over. Tom pulled up to her building, the clock on his dashboard showing 2 o'clock in the morning. "Try to sleep," he said gently. "Justice and I will pick you up at 8 o'clock sharp. We're not letting Mark win this one." Lila nodded, too exhausted for words. As she collected Emily from Mrs. Martinez's apartment, Justice stayed closer than ever, his protective instincts on high alert. The night's discoveries had changed everything, but Mark's latest move meant tomorrow would determine if it was enough to keep her daughter safe. The fluorescent kitchen light cast harsh shadows across the legal notice trembling in Lila's hands. 2:30 in the morning, and sleep felt impossible as her eyes traced over Mark's latest attack, an emergency custody petition filled with lies and twisted half-truths. In Emily's room, her daughter slept restlessly, small fingers wrapped tightly around Justice's collar. The German Shepherd lay perfectly still, allowing the contact even though it couldn't have been comfortable. His dark eyes remained alert, watching the doorway. Lila's shoulders slumped as she read the petition for the 10th time. Mark claimed she was emotionally unstable and using a potentially dangerous animal to manipulate court proceedings. He painted himself as the voice of reason, concerned about Emily's safety. The same man who had thrown plates at walls when dinner wasn't perfect, who had made their daughter cry herself to sleep so many nights. "I can't keep doing this," Lila whispered, pressing her palms against her burning eyes. "Maybe if I just agree to supervise visits, he'll leave us alone." The sound of footsteps made her jump, but it was only Tom returning from his car with another box of evidence from the storage unit. He set it down carefully and pulled out the chair across from her. "Don't you dare give up now," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Not when we're so close." "But what if he wins?" Lila's voice cracked. "What if the judge believes him? I can't lose her, Tom, I can't." "Listen to me." Tom leaned forward, his weathered face serious in the kitchen's harsh light. "This isn't just your fight anymore. It's for every woman whose name we found in those letters tonight. It's for every person he's stolen from, threatened, or manipulated. You're the one who can finally stop him." Justice padded silently into the kitchen, leaving Emily for a moment to press his head against Lila's lap. His warm weight anchored her, steadying her racing thoughts. She ran her fingers through his thick fur, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Remember what Justice showed us tonight," Tom continued, gesturing to the boxes. "All those documents, all that evidence, it proves everything you've been saying. Mark's not just an abuser, he's a criminal who's hurt dozens of people. The judge needs to see that." Lila nodded slowly, her hand still buried in Justice's fur. The dog's unwavering loyalty had led them to the truth. Now she needed to be strong enough to use it. "We should organize everything by date," she said finally, straightening her spine. "Show the pattern of how he operates." Tom smiled, already reaching for the first box. "That's more like it. I'll help you sort through it all." They spread the miniature documents across the kitchen table, financial records showing money laundering schemes, threatening letters to previous victims, photographs of stolen items, and notebook after notebook of Mark's meticulous planning. Each piece told part of a larger story of manipulation and abuse. "Look at this," Lila murmured, holding up a letter dated 3 years before she'd met Mark. "She's describing exactly what he did to me, the isolation, the threats, the way he'd turn everything around to make her feel crazy." "Document it," Tom advised. "Show how he repeats the same patterns with each victim. Rachel can use this to prove he hasn't changed, he's just gotten better at hiding it." Justice maintained his vigil at the window, ears pricked forward, watching the dark street below. Every few minutes, he would circle the apartment, checking each room before returning to his post. His presence made Lila feel safer, knowing he would alert them if Mark tried anything during the night. Hours passed as they worked, creating organized files that showed the progression of Mark's crimes. 3 o'clock became 4, then 5. The sky outside began to lighten, painting the kitchen in soft pre-dawn grays. "Emily will be up soon," Tom said, stifling a yawn. "Try to rest for at least an hour. I'll keep working on this." But Lila shook her head, reaching for another stack of papers. "I need to understand everything in these files. I need to be ready for whatever he throws at us in court." Justice left his post by the window to lean against her legs again, offering silent support. His steadfast presence reminded her of why she couldn't give up. He had protected them, led them to the truth, and now it was her turn to fight. The sound of Emily stirring in her room made Lila pause. Her daughter appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes wide as she took in the paper-covered table. "Mama?" she asked softly. "Did you find more bad things?" Lila opened her arms, and Emily crawled into her lap. Justice immediately moved closer, positioning himself between them and the door. "We found proof that your dad hurt other people," Lila explained carefully. "But we're going to make sure he can't hurt anyone else now." Emily nodded against her shoulder. "That's why Justice showed you the storage place, right? Because he knows when people are bad." "That's right, sweetheart." Lila hugged her daughter tighter, drawing strength from her simple trust. "Justice helps us find the truth." As the sun rose, casting long shadows across their kitchen table covered in evidence of Mark's crimes, Lila felt her resolve harden. The exhaustion of the sleepless night faded against the determination growing in her chest. Justice kept his position by the window, alert and watchful, while she continued organizing the proof that would finally expose Mark's true nature to the world. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation, its marble halls filled with more people than Lila had ever seen gathered there before. Reporters huddled in small groups, their whispered conversations creating a constant hum as they discussed the shocking revelations about Mark's secret life and financial crimes. Camera flashes occasionally lit up the corridor despite the court's strict photography rules. Lila's heart ached as she kissed Emily goodbye in a secure side room, where a kind-faced court officer named Sarah promised to keep her daughter safe during the proceedings. Emily's small fingers clutched Justice's fur one last time before letting go. "It's okay, Mama," Emily whispered, showing a bravery that brought tears to Lila's eyes. "Justice will help you tell the truth." Tom placed a steadying hand on Lila's shoulder as they walked toward the courtroom, Justice padding silently between them. The retired canine officer's presence gave her strength, reminding her of how far they'd come since discovering the storage locker's damning contents. "Remember," Tom murmured, "no matter what happens in there, you've already won by standing up to him. Justice, and I won't let you face this alone." The courtroom doors opened, and a wave of whispers swept through the gallery as Lila entered with Justice at her side. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at Mark, though she could feel his presence like a dark cloud across the aisle. Rachel, her lawyer, waited at their table with encouraging smile and neat stacks of evidence folders. Judge Ramirez entered, her expression stern as she surveyed the packed courtroom. "I remind everyone that this is a court of law, not a media circus," she announced, her gaze lingering on the reporters in the back row. "Any disruptions will result in immediate removal." Mark's lawyer, a sleek man in an expensive suit, stood first. "Your Honor, we move to suppress all evidence obtained from the storage facility. This was an illegal search, based on nothing more than a dog's behavior. Hardly probable cause." Rachel rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the facility manager witnessed suspicious activity and called police. The search was conducted with proper authority and documentation, which we've submitted to the court." Lila watched Mark from the corner of her eye. He sat with perfect posture, a practiced look of injured innocence on his face. She recognized that expression. He'd worn it countless times when convincing others she was unstable or imagining things. "These accusations are ridiculous," Mark declared when called to testify, his voice carrying the same smooth charm that had once fooled Lila herself. "My ex-wife is clearly desperate to maintain control. She's trained that dog to act aggressively toward me, trying to prejudice the court." Justice lay quietly at Lila's feet, giving no reaction to Mark's words. Tom had explained that this was actually more telling than aggression. The dog was so certain of Mark's guilt that he didn't even need to respond to the lies. "The documents found in that storage unit aren't mine," Mark continued, looking directly at Judge Ramirez. "Anyone could have planted them there. This is obviously a setup orchestrated by my ex-wife." His lawyers presented document after document. Character witnesses praising Mark's business acumen, therapists noting his progress in anger management, financial statements showing his legitimate income. Each piece of paper felt like another brick in a wall between Lila and Justice. The judge's expression grew increasingly troubled as she reviewed the competing evidence. She kept glancing between the financial records from the storage unit and Mark's official statements, clearly struggling to reconcile the contradictions. Mark's confidence seemed to grow with each passing minute. His smile widened, taking on the cruel edge Lila remembered from their marriage. During a brief recess, she heard him laughing with his lawyers, as if the whole thing was just an amusing inconvenience. "He thinks he's winning," Lila whispered to Rachel. "Let him think that," her lawyer replied quietly. "Overconfidence makes people sloppy." When court resumed, Mark took the stand again, his performance even more polished than before. "I've worked hard to rebuild my life," he declared. "These accusations are destroying my reputation, my business relationships. I only want what's best for my daughter." Lila felt her hands trembling under the table. How many times had she heard him say those exact words right before his worst explosions of violence? But then, something changed. Justice, who had been lying calmly throughout the proceedings, suddenly stiffened. His ears went forward, and his entire body became alert, eyes locked on Mark with laser-like intensity. Lila had never seen him so focused, so completely zeroed in on a single point. Tom noticed too. She could feel him tensing beside her. The retired canine officer leaned forward slightly, recognizing the specific change in Justice's posture that meant the dog had detected something significant. Mark continued speaking, but his eyes kept darting to Justice, the first crack appearing in his confident facade. The dog's unwavering stare seemed to unnerve him, making him stumble slightly over his practiced answers. The courtroom atmosphere shifted, becoming charged with anticipation. Even Judge Ramirez noticed the change, her gaze moving between Justice's intense focus and Mark's growing discomfort. The reporters in the back of the room leaned forward in their seats, sensing that something was about to break. Justice remained perfectly still, every muscle in his powerful body coiled with purpose. His training as both a therapy dog and former canine unit member showed in his disciplined response: no barking, no movement, just that unblinking stare that seemed to see right through Mark's carefully constructed lies. Lila held her breath, remembering how Justice's instincts had led them to the storage unit, how his unwavering certainty had helped uncover the truth so many times before. Whatever the dog had sensed now, she knew it would change everything. The tension in the courtroom built to an almost unbearable level as Justice maintained his rigid posture, his focus never wavering from Mark. The silence grew thick, heavy with unspoken revelations waiting to emerge. In a flash that stunned the entire courtroom, Justice suddenly lunged forward with unexpected strength, pulling free from Lila's grip. The leather leash trailed behind him as he moved with determined purpose straight toward Mark. Order, order in the court. Judge Ramirez commanded, but her voice was drowned out by the gasps and exclamations that filled the room. Mark stumbled backward, nearly falling off the witness stand as Justice approached him. Instead of attacking, the German Shepherd began pawing insistently at Mark's suit jacket pocket, whining with urgent purpose. Control that animal, Mark's lawyer demanded, but Justice wouldn't be deterred. The bailiff stepped forward, cautiously. Sir, please empty your pockets. This is ridiculous. I don't have to, Mark protested, but Judge Ramirez cut him off. You will comply, Mr. Stevens, or face contempt charges. With trembling hands, Mark reached into his pocket. A folded paper fell to the floor. Justice immediately sat, his tail wagging as he looked at the bailiff expectantly. The bailiff retrieved the paper and handed it to Judge Ramirez. As she unfolded it, her expression darkened. This appears to be a threatening letter addressed to the plaintiff, Mrs. Stevens. The handwriting matches previous evidence submitted to this court. Mark's face turned ashen. I can explain. I've heard quite enough explanations from you, Mr. Stevens, Judge Ramirez interrupted, her voice sharp with anger. This court has been extraordinarily patient with your deceptions. From the gallery, a woman suddenly stood up. He threatened me too, she called out. I lost everything in his investment scheme. Another person rose. He did the same to my family. The courtroom erupted as more victims found their courage, each one sharing a similar story of manipulation, fraud, and intimidation. Mark seemed to shrink in his chair as his carefully constructed facade crumbled. Judge Ramirez banged her gavel repeatedly. In light of this new evidence, and the pattern of deception and intimidation clearly established before this court, I am prepared to make my ruling. At that moment, the side door opened, and Emily peeked in. Seeing her mother's tears, she broke away from the court officer and ran straight to Lila. Mother and daughter collided in a fierce embrace, both crying tears of relief and joy. Justice padded over to them, sitting proudly between Lila and Emily, his tail wagging gently. He pressed his warm body against them both, offering the same steady comfort he'd provided throughout their ordeal. Emily buried one hand in his fur while keeping her other arm tight around her mother's neck. Thank you, Justice, Emily whispered, and the dog's tail wagged harder, thumping steadily against the courtroom floor as he continued his faithful watch over his family. Warm spring sunlight streamed through spotless windows, casting golden squares across the hardwood floors of their new home. Lila stood in the modest living room, watching Emily and Justice explore every corner of their fresh start. The house wasn't large, just 3 bedrooms and a cozy kitchen, but after everything they'd been through, it felt like a palace. Mom, Justice loves his new spot, Emily called from the window seat, where the German Shepherd had already claimed his surveillance post. His tail thumped steadily against the cushions as he watched birds flit through the front yard's maple tree. Lila smiled, remembering the judge's final ruling that had made this possible. Full custody granted, with Mark facing multiple criminal charges for fraud and witness intimidation. The evidence Justice had uncovered had opened a floodgate, leading dozens of Mark's victims to come forward. The mailbox had been filling up ever since. Today, another batch of letters waited on the kitchen counter, notes from survivors sharing their stories and thanking Lila for her bravery in standing up to Mark. Emily picked up one of the envelopes, carefully opening it as Justice shifted to lay his head across her lap. Can I read this one, Mom? Go ahead, sweetie. Emily's voice grew stronger with each word. Dear Lila, I watched your story on the news and cried. For 5 years, I thought I was alone, that I was crazy for being afraid of him. When your dog exposed the truth about Mark's schemes, it gave me the courage to tell my own story. Thank you for showing me that justice is possible. You and your daughter are heroes. Justice's ears perked up at his name, making Emily giggle as she scratched behind them. You're the real hero, aren't you, boy? The afternoon melted into evening, and Lila led them out to the front porch. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a beautiful ending to their first day in their new home. Emily sat on the porch steps, tossing a tennis ball for Justice, who bounded after it with playful barks that echoed through the peaceful neighborhood. Watching them, Lila felt tears of gratitude well up in her eyes. Justice had been so much more than just a dog. He'd been their protector, their truth seeker, the key to their freedom. His instincts had unlocked not only their second chance but had helped countless others find their voice. Emily's laughter rang out as Justice brought the ball back, his tail wagging joyfully. The sound of their happiness carried into the sunset, pure, uninhibited, and free from fear. Justice barked again, celebrating with them as the day's last light painted their new beginning in shades of gold. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story written gently for the heart.